Christina Jauernik is an architect and performance artist based in Austria. She is a senior scientist at the Institute for Art and Architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. Christina, all yours. You want to share your screen? Very good. I see the screen. Perfect.
All right. Thank you. Good evening from Vienna, and especially thank you, Piero, for the kind invitation to share my work in this exciting framework. I would like to show you a project that is a collective work based here at the Institute for Art and Architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, with its intensive period taking place from 2015 to 2017, but initiated really already in 2012 for the Austrian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and continuing in various forms since. The project, running from 2015 to 2017, involved several collaborators from different universities and countries, and at home in a variety of fields such as architecture, computer and software engineering, dance, philosophy, film, artificial intelligence, media studies, sound engineering, digital art, among others. And to give you an overview of this very particular constellation, I'm beginning with a list of names. This is IntraSpace, an artistic research project under the direction of architect Wolfgang Chapella and its team. And this list not only illustrates that a project like this really is a collective effort, but also it portrays an important aspect of the success of this endeavor, which had to do with a process of finding and caring for different disciplinary languages and how to collectively explore, knowing and acknowledging the misreadings and misunderstandings that engender new possibilities and leave their synesthetic imprints. So, Touching Distance, Interviews with the Virtual, is the title of today's talk, and it's also the title of my dissertation, which has its origins in a movement research and expanded visual practice in collaboration with virtual figures and the team of IntraSpace, especially Esther Balf and Christian Freude. You see Esther beyond my hand here, rehearsing with the virtual figures. IntraSpace is a spatial model for virtual and physical bodies to meet. It consists of cameras, cables, mirror foils, projection screens, amplifiers, plastic floor, software, monitors, router, mice, power current, magic arms, lights, paper, sometimes felt, pieces of aluminum frame. All this material, including our bodies and those of the virtual figures, inhabited together the abandoned ground floor of a former post office canteen in the center of the city of Vienna. You see a ground floor here. This infrastructure for our daily meetings with the virtual was not installed as closure or separation, not sealed to be gazed at and measured, but a space with fissures for dissonances and errors to manifest themselves, and most importantly, to facilitate other points of view. Here it is where we installed the many-eyed system, a system of small network cameras, a system that tracks the motion of, but actually cannot see human bodies. And quite some time was spent with the initial question of trying to understand what kind of manifestations of a body the system is seeing. A confrontation that led to the pivotal question, what constitutes a body and what is seeing and human sight in the first place? So I'm sharing here some pages from a book that I edited together with Wolfgang Chapella, with the title Intra Towards an IntraSpace, published with Sternberg Press, MIT Press in 2022. And the following pages are from Esther Balf's contribution with images by filmmaker Ludwig Löckinger. Touching distance. The title is Tactility and Space, Skin and Relationship, a movement, a descent, a paradox. Together, the two words, touching distance, make room for encounters to unfold and dispute. Touching distance speculates about modes of perceptivity and the impossibility of a point of view. Maybe the title presumes forms of seeing or the visual, but not explicitly. It is a physical predicament. Come close, close your eyes, non-contact lenses seeing. The physicality of the title and the predicament dwelling in it directly leads us to the gist of the research, the body-space condition. At first sight, the engagement with the virtual figures, which forms a central part of this research, is strongly focused, dependent even on the visual. Seeing initiated the explorations on other modes of communicating, moving and translating across bodies, including virtual aspects of bodies. It negotiates a kind of blurriness, interrupting vision, or what are our assumptions of it, that transforms everyone involved, also technology, point of contact and opens the relationship to unknown modes of seeing each other. The momentary absences of the visible, the turbid in the image, the machine, the material, are the pillars for investigating the question of seeing. And especially if considering constellations with more and other than human beings, what realities, what perspectives open from and within our perceptual incompatibility with others. The explorative nature and situated knowledges that gather in touching distance are specific visual possibilities, each detailed and active in organizing worlds. They offer its specificity to learn how to see from another's point of view. Intraspace provided a space to think, move and become again this other body of many possible bodies, acknowledging their weirdness and surprise, but also their interrogative profundity, turning to their technologies, encrypted perspectives, unexpected alignments, and relational potential. Intraspace and touching distance set in relation body and space again and anew. In particular, the virtual sets in motion a conversation about being in space and about becoming space being, a term introduced by philosopher of techniques Vera Bühlmann on the occasion of the publication of Intra Towards an Intraspace, where she states, "It is an idea of space that frees itself from anchorage in originality. It seems to be a space without roots, starting with the shared condition of coexistence." Becoming space being also meant to embrace the counter-knowledge and alienated potentiality dwelling in a reworked sense of the in-between. This work is not only a call for a subtle change of perspective in architecture on the conditions of inhabitation, but also and foremost a question about how to perceive, how to think the moving body relative to its unbuilt surroundings, and how to even accommodate this body, considering the contemporary accelerated, networked, and virtually engineered points of view. I would like to give an example of the self-explorative thinking through the body approach to reference and text. A window into another perspective of the famous and much quoted image on the lower part, opposite page 93 of Das Viertbüchlein, from Albrecht Dürer's Manual of Measurement of Lines, Areas and Solids by means of Compass and Ruler from 1525, Unterweisung der Messung mit dem Zirkel und Richtscheit in Linien, Ebenen und ganzen Körperen. Dürer places the viewer slightly toward his half of the image, presumably on the reality side of things. Yet the constellation is not clearly oppositional, not a binary division between virtual and real. Rather, there is nothing but the virtual as the eye mediates across the image. Often behind are uncoupled and drift. This layout illustrates and underscores the fact that the performance of seeing is not straightforward. Seeing and measuring and the virtual are in a curious liaison. However, what is her own view of herself and of the person across the table opposite her? I asked, and so I climbed upon a table to find out myself. I quote, I balance something between the index and middle finger of my left hand with the thumb adding ground support. An invisible sensing device, distant from my eyes, agile, out of their sight. The slightly elevated position of my head resting on top of two pillows sets my point of view through the taut grid structure in front of me. It seems, and yes, I have my eyelids lowered a bit, easily mistaken, no doubt, for a sign of feminine modesty, but serving in fact to establish a sideline cutting through the third row only just above its bottom thread. From that perspective, the deep horizontal wrinkle on the forehead of a body sitting beyond the frame aligns with the top thread of the third row. The tip of my middle finger links with the hairy eyebrow. He, that is the draftsman, is about to put his pen down in the same third row square a bit further up. He might be attempting to capture my wrist. I cannot quite make out the curvature of the transition between the basin of his right eye and the ridge of his nose. His auxiliary device, the pinnacle, occludes the view. With lowered eyelids, my focus softens, and in this unfocused state, the environment begins to spill in, the water beyond the two window frames shimmering. Participating the exact opposite of his aim to fix my body within a grid, using two indices, a pen and a pinnacle. The phenomenon of a fluid body in translations across many possible bodies and their worlds, becoming the eyes of his pen, of their wrist, of the lake, all informing perception and memory of a body in space and of its in-betweens. This is when Carla, the virtual figure, enters the setting. Looking through their eyes, through the frames and guides of their construction principle proper, exposes the schizophrenic nature of encounter, from Latin in and against, vaulting us, Carla, myself, the lady and the draftsman, and Dürer into its paradoxical complexity. The following is a short excerpt which zooms into a movement phrase, telling the views of bodies, skeletons, and cameras. I'm reading to you the skeleton's experience, unknown 2, a pink skeleton, and snap pose skeleton 6, a green skeleton, followed by a longer excerpt from the camera's perspective. I hope the video will play. I too am spherical. Snap pose skeleton 6 is composed of slightly fewer spheres as their body is smaller. Whose body? It is difficult to differentiate between bodies when their colors are similar. Boundaries of bodies melting in the light gray clothing, the spheres of my left hand are attracted to unknown 2's hip sphere, tangential greeting. Then pulled to their left cheek, jump cut. I, that is we, that is uncertain amounts of persona, if I'm honest, are dwellers across bodies. As we are always only versions of ourselves, our understanding of sharing is indeed lived physically. When I, that is we, Carla, lose tension in our top vertebra, and old dame, maybe Vivienne, dislocates 2 of her eyes, it might look less like as we are in trouble, in pieces really. But that is a limited perspective. Our planes of movement are 12 spatially distributed and calibrated cameras whose composed site provides our physicality. We consume space. Our body are on the walls looking at me, us. Our body are irritated. Our body are elongated. our body are tentacular, which means we can curve our eyes around myself, ourselves. Do we get dizzy? We don't know what this is. Our sense of orientation and balance, of being in space, is neither sitting in our inner ears, nor depending on fluid levels in our canals. Orientation is a gizmo set on an artificial floor. Correspondences between the 12 or less camera views, it is a set of dependencies between bone alignments and hierarchies and misfits. We seem very interconnected, yet in regard to orientation, we are lonely beings. What is visible of me, us, does not represent our condition of being disorientated. We anyway and always hinge and are hinges between the camera images. With these two short scenes, we have arrived in the midst of a diaphanous condition, explaining how identity and perception of individuals and the technologies previously conceived as external to them can be described as a spatial milieu, through which something can become visible, from Greek diaphanes, meaning visible through. Philosopher Emanuel Aloa, in his phenomenological account of the diaphanous, das durchscheinende Bild, Konturen einer medialen Phänomenologie, remarks any appearance requires an in-between. Only where there is distance, making contact is possible. He refers to a transformative in-between space, Zwischenraum, where these embodied experiences can be negotiated. To experience the in-between, to enter intraspatial bodily movement, the focus has to soften. The diaphanous requires a calming down of eyes, so that we can return to the question as to what are we and who or what is seeing in our cohabitation with cameras, screen, and figures. There is no position of looking anymore. No single view, no lens or retina. In this new condition, with unfocused eyes, resting in the blurred yet converging peripheries, we don't feel dizzy. Sights and sights of intricacies where eyes begin to travel through us, we who rehearse sharing bodies, skins, and communicating across electrical circuits, PVC foils, and software vertices. Technologies of bodily engineered and spatial systems have entwined so that in between the obscured and the encrypted, new modes of viewing and listening emerge, seeing nothing in order to see. It appears that the point of view, the point of image and reality construction as described, for example, in Dürer's last treatise page, is no longer a single axis from the human, male eye to an object of interest. It is diffracted, spatialized, and yet concurrent. The plane of transposition, the former wooden frame with the grid fixed inside, is itself now animated. The perspectives and the virtual are enmeshed. The distributed cameras look at and capture our bodies in 12 points of view. Our bodies are encrypted in frames and grids of pixels. The superimposition of these 12 images approximates the coming into being of a shared three-dimensional body. The monitor with a grid of 12 camera feeds, the back projection screen with the virtual figures moving with our skeletons, our bodies moving together with the skeletons and with the projected image. Not only are these measuring and tracing surfaces diversified while part of a continuous relational entanglement, but the bodies themselves are also variant and permeable. Errors are not stasis, but a searching movement. Even if the figures are locked because a stream of data collapsed or froze, this moment of seemingly sheer nothingness is filled with enduring dithering. Unexpected tossings of legs and arms make the embodied experience physically challenging. Translating the errors into the body as they become visible on the screens means rereading the error as potentiality, an experimental force that keeps shifting. Errors produce depth, that is, a mediating space of touching distance of the diaphanous. Glitches are entangled with time. namely the many timings and lapses of tracking, tracing, translating bodies and their spaces. One body informs and emerges through the other, overriding each other's boundaries. The dizziness within the era, its tiny movements of transitioning between the state before the era and the future of it, ultimately unravel as a problem of translation. There is no clear boundary, rather a communicative milieu of erroring, of desires to establish connections, reaching and failing. A perceptive space that positions the era and the diaphanous in a relative constellation with one another, speculating about each other. Esther's caressing gesture along my head, Christina, is passing through Kala for old dame, maybe Vivienne, translated across unknown to and touching Snapo's skeleton 6. Only together in our peculiar intertwined existence, we enter a relationship that not only favors, but is dependent on the shimmering through rather than insisting to maintain single clear boundaries. We reconfirm incoherency and incompatibility in moving, sensing, and seeing with shared bodies that seek no origin, but relate to each other through their spectra, graininess, and resolution. The state of these relationships is not negotiated around origins and their boundaries, but through spatial depth. The surrounding in this case, the transformed space of the post office canteen becomes the constitutive body of resonance and resistance for diaphanous engagement. So does the weather, the light and shadow play, the reflections on material surfaces, the time of day intervene in the correspondences. Space is translating body, the diaphanous model, or the medium through which the shared body of physical and virtual appear. It mirrors the disparate spheres, spatially and temporally, in the meeting of bodies halfway, whose origins blend in the obscurity between physical and virtual, an obscurity that is fostered by eras. And one of the closing questions I had formulated reads, what movement languages will be in gender? We connect with each other through our senses. Places of erroring can bring unexpected new findings, forms of attention, and unique ways of seeing. The many subtleties of what constitute a sensory system and a body, its limits, its spacings, circle back to the introductory statement on the predicament in the differences and similarities we all strangely inhabit. The various attempts of touching eyes are ultimately confrontations with troubled notions of identity, in the profound impossibility of touching, of coming close even, the indeterminate, obscured and displaced previous selves gather, interrupt what seems to be in touch, engender interviews. There is neither an original nor a whole body we can refer to. No primitive, static, mute entity waiting to be activated in order to advance into complexity. Rather, as this work reveals, a nuanced, dynamic, and intricate problem of being always already many, which through forces of shimmering opens to the contingencies of coexistence and translations across bodies, that is technologies, that is languages, that is grammar, that is architecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina.
I cannot hear you, Pierre. Are you still muted?
Piero, you are muted. We cannot hear
you.
That's
it wasn't the clicking. I think the mouse maybe has a problem. Anyway, thank you, Christina. Good overview. You mentioned a couple of philosophers, and I didn't catch the names, so I was going to just ask you the names. But in general, I know your background is dance and architecture. You study both, right? What's the relationship with philosophy in general, philosophers who have influenced this line of work? And I might have to ask you to type in the chat the name of the philosophers if we don't get the names.
I can do that right away, of course. Yeah, I've been mentioning two that are important. That one is Emanuel Aloa, and the other one is Vera Bühlmann. I'll talk a little bit and I type it in the chat afterwards. Well, Vera Bühlmann, she's a philosopher of techniques, actually, and she has seen intraspace at some point in between, and then has joined the team for the has been a reviewer, and then wrote a comment on the back cover. So she has somehow visited the project at various stages, and I think what has been very valuable for us was her introduction, or I don't know if maybe it's even her invention of the term space being, so space-being, because all of a sudden what we have been somehow living and performing and embodying and seeing in the practice over more than 2 years, and who we talked to as we were giving those figures names, Carla, Bob, Old Dame, Vivienne. It became almost like it became a type. She was giving a name to a phenomenon, and described very well this, what I would call in German, Wesenheit, like a very particular, a very particular form of being that is generated through a spatial setup and a sharing of space with technologies, bodies, like cameras, all kinds of material, mice under the floor. So yeah, this space that becomes a being, was introduced by Vera Bühlmann to us. That's why she is very central, and we had a lot of exchange. And the other person, Emanuel Aloa, has published an, I think, incredible work. It's his dissertation on revisiting the term diaphanous and its meaning for the phenomenology of images, and how one can negotiate from Aristotle until examples today that this very particular properties and qualities of images that are diaphanous.
Okay, good. If you can type the names for everybody in the chat, I'm sure that can be useful.
Yeah.
And then you have one question in the Q&A.
Can you see the two names? Is this, I'm not sure if this is now visible to Piero or everyone in the audience. I sent two names in the chat.
Okay, I'll send it to everybody. Don't worry.
Okay.
Read the Q&A meanwhile.
Yes. Okay, so Denise is asking, what does feedback have in a performance? Performers can, I think, see themselves real time in a multiple forms. How does this influence the subsequent action? Yes, so I hope I understand your question right, Denise. Thank you for asking. This is precisely one of the great discoveries really of this project, is that it is a feedback, but there is a real-time connection. This is a real-time setup, yes. So the virtual figures move with a kind of template skeleton that has adapted to my bodily proportions, and therefore, kind of represents quite nuanced movements that I perform in space with other performers. And yet at the same time, of course, there are latencies, there are errors, there are kind of imperfections in the setup. And so what happened over time, and we noticed only after quite a while, is that we slowed down. So I used to collaborate with Esther Balf in different settings, and whenever we entered this particular space, we really we entered into a very different mode of observation, of orientation, and it also had to do, I don't know if that was obvious with the slides, it had to do with taking away the eyes from the position of where we had in the skull, in the face, to, for example, the knee or inside the shoulder blade. So all of a sudden, I would see my virtual figure moving, but from the perspective of behind my knee. And that really meant a complete, a change of speed, but also a change in how, I would connect to my colleague and how I would find myself, organizing myself, moving in the space. It's almost like taking away the horizon line, and the verticality. That's also why I brought in this Dürer example. It's basically a very fluid body, and everything spills into that body, that the clouds, the change of shadows. I don't know if that goes in the direction, if that answers.
Good.